Hello once again, everyone. So this is kind of within the HEMA exercises, so I'm going ahead and putting it there, but really this is more of a thing that I wanted to talk about because I notice it is something people don't necessarily pay a ton of attention to, or rather they know of it, but it slips from their mind as they practice more and more complex motions, and that is not making your disengages, be that a cavazione, a durchwechseln, or a disengage as you may know it in the modern context, part of your attack. Now, absolutely, sometimes they are very much leading up to that attack, sometimes even breaching into becoming part of it, but really what I'm talking about is just the initial action of getting around a blade. So, first off, what is a disengage in case you're not tracking? It's just from below, beneath the blade, dip down, come back up, like a little V shape, or if you're going above the blade, generally it's a U. It could also be a V, but since you're going around, it's just a little U. It makes a little parachute symbol, basically. That occurs all the time in literally every single sword you do, which is why I have the three main traditions that I do on the floor before me, and I'm going to kind of go over it as we do. But the thing that I have noticed more often than not is that the disengage starts to blend into the attack, and that is taking away some of the attack's direction, the attack's effectiveness, and also slowing you down even though you think you're going faster. So, let's start off with one of the weapons I think that exemplifies the best, which is I'm going to use the saber. So, disengages are very, very common in saber, backsword, whatever, because it's how you affect most of your cuts. So if you're standing in, for example, the outside guard and I want to throw a one cut, I'm going to first perform a disengage around the blade, a little U, which also lines up my sword to cut. Then I push it forward with just my wrist and my lunge. So I go aim, fire, essentially. And I do the same thing the other way. Aim, fire. Now, the trick with this is giving yourself that time to aim it, then push it directly down the line, as opposed to making it part of your cut. Now, the difference may look very minimal here. I'll try my best to show it as exemplified as I can, but rather than that directness of I practically line my blade up, then just push it forward, the more I sweep, the more wide my cut becomes, the more momentum my cut has, which does lead to certain niceties in regards to like how it meets. But in case you've been watching the open longsword stuff, we don't always want to play a wider game. Against someone who is very judicious in their defenses, right? A nice narrow cut, sure, can still be stopped, but it has to be stopped right in front of them. Essentially, they have to create a wedge. Versus a wider cut doesn't require all that much because it takes longer to get there. This also affects accuracy. If I take the time to aim fire, I'm pretty much always going to go exactly where I want because I take that first second. If the sweep becomes part of it, cuts tend to end up almost turning into 5s and 6s on both sides. The same thing is also true if you're, for example, preparing a cut from below. It's taking that time to aim it, then get the squeeze, as opposed to whipping it and not getting as good of a cut. But that's one example. And it's especially true also in regards to like parries and things like that, where rather than going around the blade, you're meeting them, then aiming, then firing. So for example, if a one cut comes in, I defend myself against it, and I fire immediately along the blade, or to the outside of the blade, I'm still doing that small disengage to aim my shot first before I launch it back, which if I don't, that cut gets wider because it gets more wild and momentum is becoming a thing. So that's one example. The other example is, of course, in thrust-oriented weapons, so I'm going to pick up the rapier for this. Same idea. Now this one can blend a little bit more. So for example, my sword has been found, and I choose the cavazione to the other side. I want to make a nice V, and then I can extend and thrust. Now, you shouldn't cavazione or disengage needlessly. Unlike with the cuts we were just doing, this has a little bit more blade play. Someone might find your sword and you might choose to just go to the other side for a second to provoke, or you might choose to go. But there needs to be a slight pause. If this becomes part of your attack, it's going to start becoming more and more circle-like. What I'm essentially talking about is rather than me dip, aim, and extend, and making that fluid over time, it turns into this, where I'm trying to shove it forward and it starts getting that circleness. Even if I'm doing it as a V, it's becoming less controlled. That little pause to aim first, ready the body, then fire, goes a long way to improving your accuracy. And also, what's your consequence? They find my sword, I cavazione, and can attack them. They have to listen to me. The only thing I have to worry in this case is if they find my sword and I cavazione pointlessly, in which case they'll attack me. But that's a different context. Basically, take that second to aim, right? When I go, I aim, I wait, then I turn and extend. And you can also go ahead and extend the arm consequence-free, right? Getting used to just cavazione to extension instead of cavazione to attack, it's part of it anyway. Now, both of these are true with longsword. Now, strictly speaking, of course, the rapier can cut, the saber can thrust, blah, blah, blah. But you're going to find both of these instances coming up a lot more when you're using something like a longsword. Reason being is that you have to do both pretty much all the time. If I throw a cut and I get stopped, I don't want this to become part of it, like I talked about with the saber. Because while that can make me fast, it gets wider. And if I'm trying to tag ahead, that's not necessarily the best way to do so. If I'm trying to defend myself and make a wedge, that wedge is getting more and more wide. I want it to be akin to aim and fire, stepping myself behind it. That gives me a lot more control, even if I'm doing something more complicated. Now I'm employing that thumb into my cut, or things along those lines. In regards to going underneath the blade, equally true. I've thrown a cut, they're on the weak of the sword, so I can dip, then put my body in behind it to properly lock that shot down. So, all this is to say, it's really the same motion, just to certain different extremes, above, below, what have you. Don't let the disengage become part of your cut. And the same is arguably true for any sort of preparation you do. Not necessarily always the case, but another example would be before you throw a basic cut from above, you're moving to a loaded position, then bringing it down. You don't want it to be back, then forward. You want it to be up, forward. Just enough to load yourself, and then you go. That sort of bleed over in momentum, etc., is what makes your actions a little less perfect, a little less controlled, and generally slower, because now you're fighting momentum that you didn't necessarily intend for there to be. Either way, though, just a consideration for you to look at. Thank you very, very much for watching. We'll go over some other techniques another time.